Hey everyone! So you should know by now we had a snow day, and I want you guys to make up today's lecture through these video lectures by next class, so by next Tuesday. I do apologize that we have to do this video lecture, but we've had quite a lot of snow days. So try your best to follow along. Go ahead and get your notes out and follow along like you would in class. Try to get rid of all the distractions, etc. So what I assigned last class was this activity on page 219, and it was for extra credit, or at least you would earn extra credit for finishing it early. However, since we're not together today, I won't be able to do that. But don't worry, there'll be plenty of opportunities throughout the semester to earn extra credit. So if you haven't completed this page yet, I'm going to go ahead and take a brief break so that you can go to the textbook, turn to page 219, and quickly finish that activity. So I'll go ahead and pause now. Okay, so hopefully all of you guys have completed this activity, and I've kind of redrawn it here. So the first question asks what process is going on from A all the way down to C. So here we have single molecules going to one larger molecule, and that process is called synthesis. So synthesis is the creating of a larger molecule. The next question asks, what is A? What is this region? So those are called monomers. And remember, monomers are the smallest possible units. Mono meaning one. And C, this molecule down here, is a polymer. So poly meaning multiple. So it's multiple monomers. Question 4 asks what process is happening between molecule C back to molecules A. So synthesis was creating them, and hydrolysis is breaking them down. So having a really large molecule and breaking it down into smaller molecules. Questions 5 and 6 are related. It's asking what is B, so over here is B, and what is D. The only other molecule that's dealing with monomers and polymers is water. So when molecules are coming together and synthesizing, that's going to release water to create that polymer. When this polymer is being broken down in hydrolysis, it needs water. That word hydro means water, so it needs water in order to break down into these monomers. Now the last question asks how many of these water molecules were removed to make this polymer. Now the answer isn't one, which a lot of you may have thought. So every single reaction is going to release one water. So here we have a 5 monomer chain, and here's our individual 5 monomers. Every time the 2 of these come together, that's going to form a bond, and it's going to release a water molecule. So let's say these 2 come together first, and they form a bond. Well, that bond, that synthesis, releases one water molecule. So I'm going to put a dash over here. Well, now we need to add another monomer to that. So I'm going to lengthen this chain to add another monomer. That reaction releases another water. I'm going to continue this to include another monomer, that's another water, and the last monomer, which is another water. So the answer is 4. We're going to release 4 water molecules because we created 4 bonds. Or looking down here, there's a water here, here, and here. So again, that last blank is 4 waters. So that was just a review of monomers and polymers, and recall that we were beginning to talk about organic compounds. Now remember, organic compounds are compounds that have carbon in them. And carbon is the major, most important thing dealing with organic. It means it has carbon in it. And we had just talked about monomers and polymers, just meaning the smallest units and really large units. Now, with each of these types of organic compounds, we'll talk about those monomers and polymers of each of them. We started talking about these 4 different organic compounds in lab. Remember, we were testing for some of these. So the 4 organic compounds that we're going to cover in this class are carbohydrates. So that's the typical carbs that you think of, lipids, which are also known as fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. This lecture is just going to cover these first 2, carbohydrates and lipids. So carbohydrates, and typically when people think of carbohydrates, they think of bread, like you see here. But glucose is an example of a carbohydrate, and you know glucose comes from plants when they photosynthesize. So for each of these organic compounds, we're going to discuss their purpose. Why is it important for us to eat carbs? People think of carbs as a bad thing and that you shouldn't have so many in your diet. But that's furthest from the truth. Carbohydrates are very important in our diet, not just for us, but for other animals, for plants. Even if you have a strict meat eater, they also need carbohydrates. So one of the functions of carbohydrates is one we've talked a lot about already. It's used as a source of energy. So glucose is an example of a carbohydrate. Glucose is a sugar, and think of all sugars as carbohydrates. We'll talk about individual ones here soon, but glucose is a carbohydrate. We know glucose is needed for cellular respiration. That's one of the inputs of cellular respiration. Plants and animals and humans undergo cellular respiration. We need energy in that ATP form. So we take glucose plus some oxygen, that's what we're inhaling, and then our body processes that and releases water, carbon dioxide, which we exhale, and then also ATP energy, because we can't use glucose directly, but we can use ATP. So again, major function of carbohydrates, energy. A perfect example of how we use energy. So athletes will actually have lots of carbohydrates in their diet in order to get all of that energy. Or you may have heard the recommendation if you've run or know people who run that they usually have a lot of noodles or other carbs either before the race or the night before the race. The reason why? Lots of energy in there. Now related to as a source of energy, carbohydrates can also be used to store energy. So you can think of carbohydrates kind of acting like a battery. Sure, you can use a battery instantaneously. You put it in a device and you have energy instantly. Or if you're not using that device, it's going to store that energy for you to use at another time. So we've actually talked about an example of energy storage. So think back to when we were looking at that variegated leaf in lab. We were doing an iodine test looking for starch. So starch is just a whole bunch of glucose monomers. So glucose is an individual monomer. Then they start linking together, and you're going to form a really large storage molecule. So an example we've learned about already is starch. Another example is cellulose. Now animals can't make these, so know that animals cannot make starch. However, we do also link glucose together. We link glucose in these chains and these branching forms called glycogen. So down here I have an example of both of these, or really all 3 of these. So here, I guess this is a groundhog, and this right here is a glycogen chain. So each one of these red circles represents one glucose monomer, and they link together, and this is used for storage. Now, when we need that energy, when we need to actually use the energy, we can't use it in glycogen. We have to break off those individual glucose pieces in order to use them. So we're going to undergo hydrolysis to break apart this large polymer back into those small monomers. In plants, you have cellulose and starch. Again, both of these are made with glucose monomers. However, they're arranged a little bit differently. They're not branching. Because cellulose, it kind of has these sheets. Starch is kind of the circle pattern, but they're all just glucose. They don't have anything else in them. And same with animals. Plants will break down the starch in order to get the glucose they need to get the energy they need in cellular respiration. So here's a new function that we haven't discussed yet. So carbohydrates are a really important structural material for cells. And this cell, it can be not just in plants, which is what the current example has, but in animals, which I'll show you here soon. So here we have a couple of different plant cells, and you can see these little green circles in the middle of these cells. These green circles are chloroplasts, and as you should know, the pigment that's inside of these is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is giving it that green color. Now plants, some of them grow really tall, so they need to be very sturdy. So cellulose, again, it's a really huge polymer made up of glucose, is in all of these cell walls that I'm outlining here. So it helps to give structure to the plant, it helps get support to the plant. And our cells don't have cell walls, but plants do. Now, some organisms do use carbohydrates for this same function, for a supporting material. So this word right here, this is pronounced chitin, and this is a carbohydrate that is really helpful in organisms with shells, such as this lobster, or crabs, or other crustaceans. And then it also forms a skeleton around insects. So think about cockroaches. They're pretty sturdy on the outside, or a lot of beetles. So not all insects. Bumblebees don't have that really hard exterior shell. But any insect that you can think of that does have a hard shell, it's made up of chitin, and chitin's a carbohydrate. So again, these organisms need carbohydrates, even though we kind of give them a bad rep. The last function of carbohydrates that we'll discuss is cell identification. So all of our cells in our body, whether it's our skin cells, our muscle cells, the cells that make up our heart, our brain, all of these cells have labels on them. They tell your body that, hey, I'm a human heart, or hey, I'm, Professor Newtoff's heart. I belong to this person. You may have heard if anyone has gotten a heart transplant, there might be rejection. Well, that's because there's labels on that heart from someone else that says, oh, I'm John's heart, and you're trying to put me in Jane, and I don't like that because Jane's body sees John's heart as, whoa, this is a foreign invader. This shouldn't be here. But all of our cells have these markers just to let the rest of our body know that, hey, I'm supposed to be here. I'm a good cell. Sometimes they'll even say, hey, I'm not good anymore. I got infected by the flu. Kill me. It sounds really sad, but that's what the cells do in their functions. Here's some other signals that they can give. So they can say, oh, protect me. Maybe they fear that there's like the flu around, or repair me. Maybe you had a sunburn and it needs to be fixed. So all of these carbohydrates are just going to help in cell recognition. This word glycoproteins, think of glyco like glycogen or glucose. So these are on the outside of the cell. So I'm going to pause here, and we're about at the 15-minute mark. So when you're ready, go ahead and proceed to the next video.